Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I'll show you how to optimize your Blazor apps so the search engines can find you, allowing the general public to easily discover your apps. I'll cover Blazor Server and WebAssembly, and I'll show you how to upgrade your .NET 5 apps to .NET 6, as .NET 6 is required to take advantage of the new page title and head content components. I'll also show you how to avoid the flickering and double data retrieval problem that happens when you're using pre-rendering in Blazor Server. Search engine optimization is coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train. So, as you may know, in order to build an SEO-friendly application, we need to provide at a very minimum a useful title and description for every page. You can do this inside the head section with the HTML title and meta tags, respectively. So I've started here with a Blazor Server application called Blazor Server App SEO, and this is a .NET 6 Blazor Server app, and that's very important. We'll talk about .NET 5. We'll talk about WebAssembly, but right now, a .NET 6 Blazor app, this is where we're going to go. So if you take a look at, say, index, now, as you probably know, Blazor pages are not individual pages. Yes, they have unique URLs, but Blazor is a SPA framework, so it's a single page application. The index, counter, and fetch data pages are different components, but they're all essentially the same page, but they have routes, right? So this is a way that you can specify the title. Now this can be dynamic, right? We don't have to put static text in here, and the search engines will still pick up on it as if you had a static HTML site and you just made a change. Search engines will pick up on it. So now let me show you how you can change those meta tags. Let's go back to index. Right here, I'm going to paste a head content, and this is a meta tag that we can specify for this page. So as you can see, this name right here, if we just do IntelliSense, there are so many meta tags that you can add, and they're all listed here with IntelliSense. But we're going to pick description. Now let's add a description for the other two pages, counter and fetch data. Now let's run the application to see the tags in action. All right, so I'm going to press F12 to bring up the tools and look in Elements, expand the header, and now you can see the title and description are right there in the Elements view. But what happens if we view the source? Right-click, View Page Source. I don't see them here. You know why? Because they're buried after this comment on one line. Let me scroll over. There they are. Title, index, meta name, description, content, Blazor SEO index page, yada, yada, yada. So this formatting might change in the future, but the current format is not a problem for web crawlers to find the tags. And for more information, you can go to this URL right here. Control head content in ASP.NET Core Blazor apps. So the magic that makes it possible is because a Blazor Server app with .NET 6 supports pre-rendering. And to do that, the app root component needs to be rendered before the head outlet. So pre-rendering is something that I usually turn off, but what it does is the first time you go to a website, pre-rendering puts together static HTML and sends it down to the browser. And that's really good for SEO. But the downside of pre-rendering is that your lifecycle events, your onInitialized, your onParameters set, and your onAfterRender async, those will fire twice. We'll deal with that coming up here. But just to let you know, pre-rendering is the default mode, and it is necessary for SEO. Now, you may not need it. You may be building an app that's behind a firewall, that is only available to your corporate customers, and you don't want Google and Bing and all the search engines finding it, right? But if you have a Blazor server application that was upgraded from .NET 5.0 to .NET 6.0, you need to make a few tweaks to be able to render the app root component before the head outlet. So let's do that next. So I'm going to create a new Blazor server app called Blazor Server App SEO with .NET 5.0, and we're going to use .NET 5. Okay, now I'm not saying you should start with .NET 5, but if you have an existing app that uses .NET 5, I'm going to show you how to upgrade it to .NET 6 so that you can use the SEO features of .NET 6. So the very first thing we need to do is double click on the CS.proj file, and we're going to change the target framework from .NET 5 to .NET 6, just like that. We need to rebuild it so all the NuGet packages get restored. So an effective way to render the app root component before the head outlet, which is what we need to do, is to add an underscore layout.cs HTML file and move some of the content of the underscore host CS HTML there. So under pages, we're going to add a new Razor page called underscore layout. And we're going to add the following code here. Now, you can grab this right from a .NET 6 Blazor server application. You just want to make sure that you have the render mode set to server pre-rendered, which it is by default. And now we'll change the underscore host CS HTML to match what it is in a .NET 6 Blazor server template. So what we can do now is just add the page title and head content meta tags, just like we did before, to whatever pages we have. So let's go to index. Here's index. Let's go to counter. There's counter. Go to fetch data. There we go. And now let's run this guy. And just as before, we can inspect the header. There's the title. There's the description. And if we view the source, just as before, scroll to the middle of this comment and you can see the title and the meta tag for the description. Now, I told you before that these can be variables. So the meta tags themselves can be variable and the title can be variable. And that's not a problem. As I said before, it's just as if you had static HTML files, you went in and made a change. The search engine will eventually come around to find it. So depending on your app needs, you may choose to create dynamic titles and meta tags. And you can do that either by creating a class with all your pages, hard-coded titles and descriptions, creating them dynamically based on the specific page, retrieving them from a database, or however you want to do it. So in order to set the values, all you need to do is provide the values via code. So back in the index page, I've added a couple of strings. Page title is going to be title updated at, and then the current time. And page description updated at the current time. And now I can just plug those in where my title and description are. And then every time the page refreshes or re-renders, we're going to get a new title and description. Now, I'm not saying this is what you should do. I'm just illustrating that these can be dynamic. So let's check it out. Okay, so you see this one. Title updated at 3:29:03 p.m. Let's just hit F5 and refresh it. And sure enough, it gets updated. Now for the description meta tag, let's look in the elements in the header. Description updated at 3:29:11. And if we refresh, now the description is 3:29:32. And you know what? Same with our title. Next up, WebAssembly. So I'm going to create a new Blazor WebAssembly app called Blazor WebAssembly App SEO. It's going to be .NET 6, not .NET 5. and it's going to be a standalone app. So I'm not going to select hosted right here. I'm going to leave it as a standalone app. So to be able to use the new page title and head content components, we need to add a head outlet root component into the program CS file. And the .NET 6 Blazor WebAssembly app template does this for us. And you can see it in program CS. There it is right there. Uh-oh, here comes a tip. If you're converting a .NET 5.0 Blazor WebAssembly app into .NET 6.0, like we did before, you have to add that line to your program CS file, but that's all you have to do. Okay, now you can add a page title component with a title and a head content component with a description, meta tag in all three files. So let's do that again. All right, there's the head content for index razor. Here's the head content for that, our description tag, and finally fetch data. So for Blazor WebAssembly applications, that is not the end of the story. Even though we're able to use the page title and head content components, we still have more work to do. So let's take a look here now. So if we inspect the elements in their current state, as we did before, you can see that the title is set and the description is also set. However, if we view the page source, you can see that the title and the description meta tag are clearly not set. So what's going on here? Well, for starters, the titles of all three pages are being set by the index.html under the web root folder. Titles and descriptions are not being properly set by the page title and head content components. The issue is because the Blazor WebAssembly app is not being pre-rendered. So in order to make this work, you have to take advantage of pre-rendering. The good news is that render mode server pre-rendered in a Blazor WebAssembly application is possible, although it is actually called WebAssembly pre-rendered and not server pre-rendered. The bad news is that it requires you to host your Blazor WebAssembly application in the ASP.NET Core app, and it requires many steps to make it happen. In short, if you're writing a new Blazor WebAssembly application from scratch, you can host your Blazor WebAssembly app in an ASP.NET Core server app by checking the appropriate box when creating a Blazor WebAssembly application. But you still have to make several changes to make it SEO friendly. So rather than trying to replicate in this demo the steps needed to make our Blazor WebAssembly app into an SEO friendly application, I will redirect you to this very well documented step-by-step instructional document from Microsoft. So we'll come back to this document in a second, but first let's create a new Blazor WebAssembly hosted application. So the document tutorial says to create an app called Blazor Hosted. So that's what I'm going to do. And also, we're going to check off ASP.NET Core Hosted right there. Okay. So the first thing they're saying to do after creating the app is to delete the webroot index.html from the client project. So in the client project, there's webroot index.html. We're going to delete it. Next, in the client project, we're going to delete these lines in program CS. These two right there. Next, we're going to add _host CSHTML and layout CSHTML to the server projects pages folder. And I'm just going to copy the ones that we had from our last Blazor server application in there. So they're going to go right here in this pages folder under the server project. There we go. Now I've just copied them in from my Windows Explorer. So we're going to make some changes to layout right here. We're going to update the pages namespace at the top of the file to match the namespace of the server apps pages. So that namespace, we're going to delete this and add Blazor hosted server pages as the namespace. So here's the namespace right there. Blazor hosted server pages. The next step is to add a using directive for the client project at the top of the file. Still in layout. Next, they want us to update the style sheet links to point to the WebAssembly project style sheets, right? So we're going to get rid of those lines and we're going to add these lines. So I'll copy that. We're going to take all of these out right here, including the head outlet, the component, and replace it with this. So we still have our bootstrap in there, but now we're pointing to the CSS file in the client style sheet, and the render mode is WebAssembly pre-rendered. Next, we're going to update the Blazor script link to the client-side version. There it is. Now the next change is in the _host CSHTML file. Going to change the namespace at the top to Blazor hosted client. And we're going to update the render mode of the component tag to WebAssembly pre-rendered. Next, in the endpoint mapping of the server project in Program CS, we're going to change the fallback from index.html to _host CSHTML. So here's a note. If the client and server projects use one or more common services during pre-rendering, factor the service registrations into a method that can be called from both projects. And there's a link there for that. So now let's go to our index, counter, and fetch data pages and add back those meta tags. And let's run it. So inspecting the header, there's the title. There's the description meta tag that's in there. Now let's view the source. Look at that. There's our Blazor comment, which if we scroll over, there's our index and meta tag. You knew it would be there, didn't you? Yeah, I thought so. So let's talk about pre-rendering and the double access problem, which is that when pre-rendering is on, your lifecycle events, on initialized, on parameter set, and on after render will all fire twice. The first time when it's pre-rendering to get the static HTML, and the second time once the circuit has been established and everything is live and working. So the document here has this persist pre-rendered state section. So this is making use of the new persistent component state component, which without it, the state used during pre-rendering will get lost. It'll have to be recreated once the application is fully loaded the second time. And this is particularly an issue when you're making asynchronous calls. A consequence would be that the application may flicker as the pre-rendered static UI is replaced with temporary placeholders and then rendered again. So we're going to use this persistent component state to fix that problem. So I've gone back to my Blazor server app, and right here in host CSHTML, I'm going to add this persist component state. Now let's use fetch data as the demo here. So I'm going to add the following to the top of fetch data. I'm going to inject a persistent component state object called application state, and I'm also going to implement iDisposable. We'll talk about that in a second. So down in the code section, we need one of these. Persisting component state subscription, which we will get by registering with this guy, application state. So we can do that right here. So I'm pulling out state subscription from application state register on persisting, and this is a delegate, so we're going to need a method called on persisting. So we're going to call persist as JSON using whatever key you want. We're going to use forecast data, and the forecasts list is going to be persisted. So this onPersisting event will not run twice, but only once, as opposed to onInitialized async. So once the data is persisted, we can modify the code that retrieves the data from the service as before, but only for the first time. The second time, we can retrieve it from the persisted object. So check this out. So right here, we're going to try to pull it out of storage, try take from JSON, weather forecast array forecast data, into a variable called stored. And if that is successful, we're going to set forecasts to stored. That would be the second time. The first time, we're just going to call our getForecasts_async the way we normally do. So the end result is we're only going to call our data service once, and that's really important. Finally, we need to implement dispose to dispose that state subscription. Now to test this out, let's put a breakpoint here and a breakpoint here and run the app. So fetch data the first time, goes and gets the data. And then the second time, it didn't load. So in order to really test this, we have to come in right at this page from the application. So there's the first time, there's the second. And just like that, we've solved our double dipping problem. And that is all I got on SEO today. However, it's a big topic, and there are several techniques you can use to better index your pages by the web search engines. So besides the title and description, the H1 tag on each page plays a very important role in SEO. So make sure that you have an H1 tag on your pages. There are restrictions on how long title, description, and H1 headers can be. So make sure you visit each search engine's official documentation. You should also create a sitemap.xml file in the root, which is basically a file that contains a list of the pages on your site, among other information. And back in the day, the keywords metadata used to be considered for SEO, and that would be a comma-separated list of keywords relevant to your page. And that's no longer the case, so don't bother adding those. So, in this episode, we showed you how to utilize the new page title and head content components that were introduced in .NET 6 to make SEO-friendly applications in both Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. We also talked about how render mode server pre-rendered aids with SEO, and how you can upgrade a .NET 5.0 Blazor Server app to .NET 6 by making small changes utilize the page title and head content components. We saw how server pre-rendered presents a double data retrieval and flickering problem, and we used persistent component state to solve that problem. Finally, we also talked about how WebAssembly pre-rendered in Blazor WebAssembly applications helps you write SEO-friendly WebAssembly apps as well. So we've got some resources on the repo, which are linked at blazortrain.com. Now back to you in the studio, Carl. Hey, let's see what happens if I enter Blazor Train Carl into Google. Hey, that's not me. What? Hey guys, how come when I enter Blazor Train Carl into Google, it shows a dirty donkey? It should show Blazor Train.